Hello everyone, this is Free Japan Channel FJC. Today is Tuesday, September 19th. Time is 6 o'clock p.m. So the beginning of today's evening, but the sun is still in the western horizon and it's shining brilliantly. But the wind from the window is so cool, and I realize that autumn is here in Yokohama. Dear listeners, how are you getting along? I'm well, and today I would like to introduce Japanese philosophy, Japanese modern philosophy to you. Japanese modernity began from the Meiji Restoration, so 1868. So Japanese modernity is still 140 or 50 years or so, relatively short. Before that, before the Meiji Restoration, Japanese philosophy was totally linked with Japanese religion and other ideas. So it is a bit difficult to introduce to the listeners overseas the philosophy prior to Meiji Restoration, philosophy before the modernity, but philosophy after the modernity or after the Meiji Restoration here in Japan is no doubt Kyoto School. Do you know the Kyoto School of Philosophical group in 1920s, 30s, 40s? This school is now notorious for collaborating with Japanese militarism before and during the war. And some of the professors of Kyoto School encouraged students to go to the battlefield instead of studying. So these professors were, after the war, dismissed, thrown away from the university, from the Kyoto University, and the stream of Kyoto School disrupted after the war. But before and during the war, the influence of Kyoto School, whose name derives from Kyoto University, of course, was so great that almost every intellectual or university student at the time read the writings of professors of Kyoto School. The most famous professor was Kitaro Nishida. Have you ever heard of his name? Kitaro Nishida. So Nishida was the founder of Kyoto School, and he was the professor of Kyoto University in the early 20th century. So many prominent philosophers, so many prominent professors, philosophical professors and students who were longing for philosophy gathered to Kyoto to study with Professor Nishida. And Nishida's text was so widespread before the war period here in Japan. So Kyoto School, Nishida and his disciples, Kyoto School can be said to be the philosophy of Japanese modernity. Then, what is the content of Nishida philosophy? Kitaro Nishida wrote his best-selling book, Study of Good, in 1911, and he published it in the same year. This book was so well sold that even now this book can be sold. We can get it in the bookshop. So it was 1911, the first edition. So 112 years old. But this book is still read by students as well as teachers. And the main theme of study of good was to unite subject and object. The unification of subject and object was the main theme of study of good by Nishida. Western philosophy is known to be the division of subject and object, especially since Descartes. Subject and object were divided into two parts, and subject is the entity which recognizes and perceives the object, and the object was something to be perceived, to be recognized by subjects. So the division of subject and object continued since Descartes' time. So to name a few big names, Kant or Husserl or Sartre, these philosophers took it for granted that subjects and objects were separated. So we can say that this division of subject and object was, in a sense, the mainstream of Western modern philosophy. But Nishida, as early as in 1911, he argued the unity of subject and object. In a book, Study of Good, of Nishida, there comes following description, such as the subject, in this sense, I hear the rustling sound of leaves of big tree in the garden. I hear the rustling sound of leaves of big trees in the garden. I hear that. But not only I, but also the rustling sound also hears itself. Can you understand it? So here we can clearly see the mixture of subject and object, as it were, the space itself, the space in which I and rustling sound and the big tree exist, the space itself hears the sound. So this unity of subject and object preceded the philosophy of Merleau-Ponty of 1940s. Merleau-Ponty is also very famous for aiming at the unification of subject and object. But Nishida preceded Merleau-Ponty by 30 years. So I think that we Japanese should be more proud of Nishida's achievement to the unification of subject and object in as early as 1911. Merleau-Ponty's work, the perception, the phenomenology of perception, this is the most famous work of Merleau-Ponty, was published in 1946. So Nishida's work preceded Merleau-Ponty's work. If we reflect the relationship between subject and object, this division is in fact the cause of unhappiness of the world. Can't we say so? The separation of subject and object, the feeling that I'm different from them, I'm different from him, I'm different from it. This feeling, this separation is the main cause of the unhappiness of human beings, ultimately speaking. So, in this sense, the calamities of 20th century in the Western civilization, World War I, World War II, or others, other conflicts, and other massacres, these were caused by the separation of subject and object. And if we can overcome the separation of these two, then we can live in more harmonious world than now. So this unification of subject and object, the unity of these two, should be the main theme of philosophy in the modern philosophy in the West. So Merleau-Ponty is very famous for his work, Phenomenology of Perception. And Nishida was, in a sense, precursor of this unity philosophy, so to speak. Here in Japan, there is still some influence of Buddhism, and Buddhism teaches us the state of nothingness, the state of nothingness. This nothingness doesn't mean the scarcity or shortage or lack of something, not at all. This nothingness, which Buddhism teaches us, is the synonym of being itself. Being itself is nothing or nothingness, because being itself can't exist. What can exist? What can exist is the individual item or individual person. They can exist here in this world, but being itself, existence itself, cannot exist. Rather, this being itself is the basis of the existence of individual unit, whether it is humans, creatures, or things, whether it is animated or not. So, this tradition of nothingness, of Buddhism, which continued here in Japan, mixed Western philosophy in Kyoto school, and then it resulted in the unity of subject and object. I think that many more Japanese people should be interested in Nishida's philosophy because, unfortunately, most of Japanese are not so aware of this philosophy, but also many people overseas should pay attention to the philosophy of Nishida and Kyoto school. I'm very glad if some of you may begin to read the work of Nishida and Kyoto school hearing this broadcasting. Thank you.